Unusual feminine characters have always had a special fascination for opera composers. One only has to recall the titles of the most popular operas to realize to what extent that is true. Think of Carmen, Aida, Gioconda, Tosca, Butterfly, Salome, Electra, to name but a few. But among these strange and fascinating feminine creatures, none is as unusual and fascinating as the two heroines with whose adventures I will be privileged to deal on this side of the record, Massenet's Esclarmonde and Alban Berg's Lulu. Massenet, of course, occupies a very special position where operatic heroines are concerned. Looking at the titles of his 27 works for the lyric stage, we discover no less than 14 that bear the names of women. Listing only the most famous titles, we have Manon, Thais, Herodias, and also Esclarmonde, who holds a peculiar and unique place in this gallery of adorable ladies. Unique not only because she was Massenet's favorite, but also because, it seems to me, that she, more than any other heroine of fiction, embodies the essence of masculine erotic fantasies. She is a creature of the mysterious Near East, whose face is hidden behind a veil. She is man's secret mistress, the magic seductress who singles him out and appears to him every night to initiate the most delicious amorous caresses. And this is not all. Even though she disappears at sunrise, her magic influence enables the man who calls this extraordinary treasure his own to perform heroic deeds during the daylight hours, while being certain that at night time this delicious creature will visit him again. Certainly all this secrecy, magic, power, and passionate fulfillment is the very stuff of man's most avid desiring. In analyzing this remarkable opera, we can clearly perceive three strong underlying influences: the old-time French romantic tale, which was the source of the plot, the influence of Richard Wagner's musical and dramatic symbolism, and not least the availability of an exceptionally gifted singer, the American soprano Sybil Sanderson, who captivated Massenet by her remarkable vocal gifts. Let us first consider the plot. Emperor Phorcas of Byzantium, who is not only a great ruler but also a sublime magician, announces his resignation. His daughter, Esclarmonde, whom he has trained in the art of magic, will inherit the throne on her 20th birthday. But now Esclarmonde must withdraw from the world and hide her face behind a long flowing veil. At a prescribed day there will be a great tournament in Byzantium, and the winner of this joust will then become Esclarmonde's husband. Until then, only Parcès, Esclarmonde's sister, will be allowed to see Esclarmonde's face. So much for the prologue. In the first act we learn that Esclarmonde has fallen in love with a French knight, Roland, Count of Blois. When Roland passed through Byzantium on his way to his native France, Esclarmonde, hidden behind her veil, caught a glimpse of him, and now she cannot forget him. She bemoans her fate that dooms her to belong to some unknown winner of a tournament rather than to a man of her own choosing. From Aeneas, Parcès' fiancé, the sisters learn that in the course of his adventures, Aeneas met only one knight who was stronger and more gallant than he. That was none other than Roland of Blois. Aeneas mentions also that the French king, Cléomère, in order to keep Roland attached to his court, is planning to have Roland marry his daughter Bathilda. This news comes as a great shock to Esclarmonde, who now decides to take things into her own hands. After Aeneas departs, Esclarmonde informs her sister that she will use her magic powers to take amorous possession of Roland. With the help of the spirits whom she controls, Esclarmonde will lure Roland to an enchanted island, and still veiled will appear to the French knight in person and subdue him by ardent caresses. Esclarmonde now intones some Kabbalistic incantations, and lo, we are regaled with a series of visions produced by a magic lantern. We are shown King Cleomer and his courtiers who are hunting in the Ardennes forest. A boar is slain, but then a white stag wearing a golden crown is seen fleeing from the hunters. The stag attracts Roland's attention, and the magic animal leads Roland to the seashore, where a ship guided by invisible forces awaits the Frenchman and takes him to a mysterious island where he will be greeted by Esclarmonde. All this is made clear not only by the pictures and the words sung by Esclarmonde and Parcés, but also by the orchestra, which underlines all the events shown in the projections with the most graphic tonal painting. King Cleomer's hunters are accompanied by fanfares of French horns. The stag that lures Roland away from his companions also takes his musical harmonies farther and farther away. The sudden appearance of the seashore and of the expanse of the ocean is illustrated by a drastic change in the music. And when Roland steps on the ship, his theme played by the orchestra obediently follows him on board. And it is not only Roland who has an individual theme that belongs to him. The spirits, Aeneas, Esclarmonde herself, and several other characters of the opera are represented by eloquent musical phrases, pretty much in accordance with the system of the so-called leading motifs developed and perfected by Richard Wagner. The phrase that accompanies Roland as he boards the ship was heard earlier in the opera when Esclarmonde was recalling her first glimpse of the French knight. The same theme, in a much more energetic musical shape, will be heard when Roland will act as the defender of the French people against their Saracen invaders. The spirits commanded by Esclarmonde are always accompanied by a very telling orchestral passage, which will be heard on all occasions when the services of these supernatural beings are required by the plot. Wagner lovers are certain to be startled by the theme allotted to Parcés's fiancé Aeneas, for it is, for all practical purposes, identical with the motif associated with Walter von Stolzing in Die Meistersinger. It seems impossible to believe that the resemblance between these two themes is accidental. Here is Aeneas's music. And here is Walter's theme. It seems fairly obvious to me that Massenet was openly paying his respects to Wagner and acknowledging his indebtedness to the great German operatic innovator who had died less than 6 years before Esclarmonde was composed. There are, however, some important differences between Wagner's and Massenet's treatment of leading motifs. Massenet occasionally makes his descriptive and characteristic phrases much longer than Wagner. This is especially true of Esclarmonde's motif, which is first introduced as a very short phrase. It soon branches out into a long and sensuous theme and is thereafter heard usually only in its fully expanded form. Another Wagnerian with a difference aspect of Massenet's music is the extremely sensuous and passionate manner in which he treats the second act love scene between Esclarmonde and Roland. Writing this voluptuous music for his passionate heroine must have given Massenet considerable pleasure, even though it shocked quite a few of his contemporaries. Present-day audiences will find this love-making music pleasant, but by no means vulgar or shocking. The plot of the opera unrolls in a predictable manner. Aided by St. George's sword, Roland defeats the chief of the Saracen and saves the French nation from slavery. But when the grateful King Cléomer offers Roland the hand of his daughter Bathilda, Roland turns her down and stubbornly refuses to divulge the reason behind this ungallant action. The Bishop of Blois then decides to question Roland. Pretending to respect his oath of silence, the bishop urges him to confess his sins to the Almighty, assuring the young man that such an act of religious devotion would in no way run counter to his chivalry or his word of honor. After hearing the story of the veiled enchantress, the horrified bishop becomes convinced that the young hero is being pursued by a wicked demon in the shape of a woman. With the approach of the night, the bishop and his assistants lie in wait near Roland's bedchamber, and when Esclarmonde appears for her nightly appointment, the priests break down the door and tear the veil from her face. Amazed by her beauty, Roland begs Esclarmonde to forgive him, but it is too late. Not only has he broken his promise, but she, having shown her face, is also dishonored. Esclarmonde is still able to disappear from the sight of the priests, but otherwise her magic powers are gone. In the fourth act, she is told by an invisible chorus of spirits that unless she gives up Roland forever, he must die. The lovers meet, but in order to save his life, Esclarmonde tells him that he must never see her again. Fortunately for both of them, there is still the epilogue. The tournament held to celebrate Esclarmonde's 20th birthday takes place. Roland, who having lost Esclarmonde has also lost all desire to live, takes part in the combat just to seek his death. He wins, and all ends well. Massenet was much too fond of his heroine to expose her to an unhappy ending. In the opening sentences of this recording, I described both Esclarmonde and Lulu as unusual and fascinating. But if Esclarmonde exemplifies the magic enchantment of love, Lulu is the embodiment of the evil magic that destroys men. The opening phrase of the opera, played with blaring brilliance by a solo trombone, is symbolic of Lulu's devilish and paralyzing influence. The motif played by the trombone is continued by the horn and the trumpet. And these ascending intervals lead us directly into the prologue, in which a lion tamer describes the characters of the story by comparing them to a menagerie of wild animals. And very soon we get to hear some of the musical themes belonging to a few of these animalistic characters. The lion tamer himself, who later in the opera appears as the circus acrobat Rodrigo, is characterized by chord clusters on the piano. Here is the theme of Dr. Schön, the powerful tiger who leaps and swallows whatever crosses his path. Notice the leap of the interval of the 10th in his theme. Here is the vocal line describing the artist-painter, the greedy animal who eventually dies from overeating. Der von Anbeginn gefräßig, bei spätem Nachtmahl tot zu Boden sinkt. But the most important character of all is the snake, Lulu, who, dressed in her enticing costume of Pierrette, is actually carried onto the stage in the arms of one of the circus attendants. According to the lion tamer, this snake was created to foment evil, to lure, to seduce, to poison, and to murder in a subtle and unnoticeable manner. But Lulu is more even than that. She is the symbol of the eternally feminine in its most depraved form. She is the woman who, by means of her charm, her sexual appeal, her utter wickedness and selfishness, destroys every man who falls into her clutches. Later, in the first scene of the opera, while Lulu is still in the presence of the corpse of her first husband, who has just died from a heart attack, we will hear the following revealing dialogue between her and the artist-painter, who just a while ago tried to make love to Lulu. Kannst du die Wahrheit sagen? Ich weiß es nicht. Have you ever told the truth? I don't know that. Do you believe in God? I don't know about that. What do you believe in? I don't know. Do you have a soul? I have no idea. Have you ever loved anyone? I don't know. I don't know. This short snatch of conversation gives us an inkling of the makeup of the female monster portrayed in this opera. The full truth about Lulu emerges only gradually. We learn that she has never known either her mother or her father. Before she was 12 years old, she was picked up by an elderly lecher named Szygolь, whose music, by the way, is part of the vermin passages paraded by the lion tamer in the prologue. Szygolь debauched her, named her Lulu, and taught her to be a pickpocket. Lulu plied her trade under the cover of selling flowers outside an open-air cafe. Here, at the age of 12, she tried to steal the watch of Dr. Schön, who caught her at it, but who, instead of calling the police, became fascinated by the little devil. He fed her, gave her pretty clothes, and eventually made her his mistress. Dr. Schön, an important man of affairs and the editor-in-chief of the local newspaper, decided some years later to marry a girl of his own circle. To get rid of Lulu, he found her a respectable husband, the elderly municipal medical counselor Dr. Goll, who was totally unaware of Lulu's unsavory past. Even though married to Dr. Goll, Lulu continued to visit her former lovers, Dr. Schön and also Szygolь, whom she passed off as her father. Dr. Schön had every intention of getting rid of Lulu, but the girl had put it into her head to marry him eventually, and by her continuing visits to his apartment made it impossible for Schön to announce his engagement to his chosen fiancée. In the meantime, Lulu, dressed, or rather semi-undressed, as Pierrette, is having her portrait painted by a man who in the opera is known simply as the artist. It is at this point that the opera begins. Lulu's sexual appeal is more than the artist can endure, and we find him making passes at the girl. Lulu's husband, who enters into the artist's studio at this moment, catches his wife in the embraces of the artist. Gol tries to hit the guilty pair with his walking stick, but gets so overexcited that he dies on the spot from a sudden heart attack. Things look bad, but Dr. Schön succeeds in hushing up the unsavory affair and also induces Lulu to marry the artist, who soon becomes immensely rich by selling his wife's portraits all over Europe. For a while, the artist revels in his sudden affluence, but his delight is short-lived when he discovers that old Trzygolj is not his wife's father, but her lover, and that she also continues to have sexual relations with Dr. Schön. The greedy bear of an artist has a severe attack of emotional indigestion and commits suicide by cutting his throat with a razor blade. And so Lulu's second marriage also ends with the sudden death of her husband. Before continuing with the story of Lulu's marital adventures, it may be fitting to make some general remarks about the music Alban Berg fashioned for this wicked temptress and for her repellent entourage. The vocal and orchestral sounds of Lulu are certainly very different from the music that the average opera lover enjoys when listening to our regular operatic repertoire. Those familiar with Alban Berg's Wozzeck will, of course, be less surprised and shocked by Lulu's music. As most opera lovers know, Alban Berg was one of the first practitioners of the so-called serial or 12-tone system of musical composition. In this system, most melodies and harmonies are extracted from various combinations based on a sequence of 12 different notes of the scale. Here, for instance, is one of the 12-tone rows that Alban Berg employed in his Wozzeck. This accompanies the rising of the moon. The use of a series of non-repeating tones accomplishes several aims. It avoids a dependence on a tonal center and on any key relationship. It also provides a great variety of musical possibilities embedded in a very consistent and homogeneous style of utterance. The basic row of 12 tones used by Alban Berg in this opera is the one associated with the heroine Lulu. This row is then subjected to a number of reshufflings and permutations. The 12 tones are occasionally reassembled in form of chords. Here, as an example, are 4 chords, each of which has 3 different notes borrowed from the set of 12, which are associated with the character of Lulu. These chords become a theme, which is used in connection with Lulu's portrait. Since all the characters in the opera, not only the men, but also Lulu's lesbian admirer, the Countess Geschwitz, fall under the spell of Lulu, it is only to be expected that Lulu's basic musical row of 12 tones infects all the other personages of the opera, so that the themes allotted to them are in fact only complicated rearrangements of Lulu's music, and thus function as projections of the evil effect that Lulu exercises on everyone who comes close to her. Here, for instance, is Dr. Schön's theme I played a few minutes ago. It sounds very different from Lulu's musical theme, but is in fact made up of a related version of the same 12 tones. When attending a performance of this opera, the listener is rarely aware of all these musical resemblances, but it is nevertheless astonishing to what an extent the vocal and orchestral language of this opera intensifies the human and psychological appeal of the drama. To return to the story of the opera, the third scene of the first act takes place in a dressing room of a theater. Dr. Schön has arranged to have Lulu dance the principal role in a pantomime written by his son Alva. Here we meet an African prince who has become infatuated with Lulu and wants to marry her. Dr. Schön is anxious to break off his continuing affair with Lulu, but cannot bear the thought of being permanently separated from her. Lulu takes advantage of Schön's weakness. She threatens to marry the prince and to emigrate to Africa. Schön will do anything to prevent it, and so he again becomes the victim of Lulu's evil magnetic influence. As the first act ends, Lulu dictates and Schön writes an abject letter of farewell to his fiancée. This episode, the composer calls it a letter duet, is put together in a surprising combination of singing, acting, and orchestral playing. To the strains of a graceful gavotte, Lulu tells Dr. Schön what he should write, and a few seconds later, as we see him put down her words, we also hear the orchestra imitate the music Lulu has just sung. We have here an unusual canonic imitation of a vocal line with a delayed instrumental and dramatic action. Lulu's chief aim has now been accomplished, and she feels that Dr. Schön will soon be her next husband. This marriage, in fact, takes place at some point after the end of the scene. As the next act begins, we find ourselves in Schön's home. Even though Lulu and Schön are married, the household is filled with people who are desperately in love with Lulu. These include a servant, the circus acrobat Rodrigo, a schoolboy, and the Countess Geschwitz. As if this weren't enough, Lulu is also flirting passionately with Dr. Schön's son Alva, who has seemingly been infatuated with her since his early childhood. There is little wonder then that caught in this menagerie of prospective lovers, who all thirst for his wife's favors, Dr. Schön is slowly losing his mind. Things come to a climax when Schön interrupts a love scene between his wife and his son. Driven nearly out of his mind, Schön presses a revolver into Lulu's hand and urges her to commit suicide. Instead, Lulu shoots and kills her husband. The scene ends with Lulu's arrest. Before the action of the opera can continue, Lulu must be able to escape from prison. As everyone knows, operatic plots are filled with unusual schemes for helping women to evade dangerous situations. In La Gioconda, Laura escapes by means of a narcotic potion which makes her appear to be dead. In I Puritani, Queen Henriette Marie of England gets away protected by another woman's wedding veil. Lulu's flight from prison is more spectacular and certainly more gruesome than any other one. It was arranged by Countess Geschwitz, whose unnatural love for Lulu gave her the incentive and the courage to perform a truly stupendous sacrifice. In the final scene of the second act, Lulu herself describes the machinery of the escape, to quote Lulu's own words. It was the cholera epidemic raging in Hamburg which formed the basis of Countess Geschwitz's plan for my liberation. The Countess took a crash course in nursing and went to Hamburg to take care of cholera patients. At the very first opportunity, she put on the underclothing in which one of the patients had died. The same morning, she traveled back here and came to see me in my prison cell. We quickly exchanged our underclothes, and naturally, both fell ill with cholera on the same day. We soon found ourselves lying side by side in the isolation ward of the hospital. The Countess used all her tricks to make our faces as much alike as possible. The day before yesterday, she was discharged, but she came back saying she had forgotten her watch. I put on her clothes, and she slipped into my prison garb. And then I went away, and now she is lying there as the murderess of Dr. Schön. At the end of the second act, we are again shown to what depths Lulu has sunk in her lack of any decent feelings for either the living or the dead. As Alva makes love to her, she points to the sofa on which she is reclining and says in a very casual manner, "Why, this is the exact spot where I shot your father." And the opera ends with the same blaring statement with which it had begun.